The music's getting a little overpowering. Me. Come on. Shunsu. Voicesu. Alright, thank you. No. The strange letter that the witch had entrusted to Mario wiped all memories of dinner from our minds. Mario was repeatedly barraged with questions by Aunt Rosa and the other parents, and became increasingly ill-tempered when they refused to believe her. If we kids tried to butt in, they'd probably ignore us. Our parents were all stirred up, firing backwards and forwards about the gold and the distribution of the assets, and completely forgetting that we were even there. I'd already guessed they'd been talking like this in the shadows, but I hadn't thought they'd be so blunt. It gave all us kids a considerable shock. From what we could overhear, all the parents wanted more money as soon as possible. Back and forth by grandfather's inheritance, backwards and forwards about the distribution of the gold if it was found, about advance payments and cash. It was so despicable I could hardly bear to watch, even though one of them was my father. It looked like Jessica felt the same way. We left our seats without being asked to and went to hang out somewhere well away from our parents. Yeah.
じいさまが飯の席にも顔を出したくない理由がよーく分かったよ。うちの親たちにはすっかり幻滅だぜ。金だの遺産だの。よくもまああそこまで大っぴらに。
俺の場合はクソ親父に幻滅しきってるからよ。これ以上評価の下がりようがないぜ。
そんなの私だって同じだぜ。しかし今夜のには呆れたぜ。心底呆れたぜ。
Jessica looked down at the floor, irritated. She was always talking about how bad her parents were, but maybe she hadn't really felt that way deep inside. The depths of Jessica's shock made that clear.
未成年の君たちはご両親に養育してもらってるからわからないだろうけど、お金を得るというのは単純な綺麗事じゃないよ。未成年である今にそれを理解しろとは言わない。でもご両親なりに何かの努力をしていることだけは認めてあげてほしいな。
やれやれ、ジョージの兄貴は人間ができてるぜ。
ジョージ兄さんは社会人になってバリバリ働いてるけどよ。金とか財産とかそういう話になったら、うちの親父たちみたいに強欲むき出しのハゲタカになれるってのかよ。
自分だけの話だったらそんなことはしたくないよ。でも家族や社員、部下やその家族の生活を背負ったら戦わなければならない時もあるかもしれない。
私はそんな戦い嫌だぜ。小さまの遺産がどうのこうのなんて話、ヘドが出るぜ。
Jessica pretended to spit violently. That harsh reaction made the depths of her pain very clear.
もうこの話はやめようぜ。じいさまの隠し黄金がどうのこうの、財産だ遺産だって話は親たちの問題で俺たちの問題じゃないさ。
僕も同感だよ。せめて気を利かせて親たちの話し合いを邪魔しないのが子供の務めだと思うね。
なんだか面白くねえぜ。
Everyone knows the phrase, adults are filthy, but we had now seen that for ourselves, and that really did give us a considerable shock. George Aniki was now pretty much an adult, and I'd already been disillusioned with my dad, so the shock wasn't that big for us. But Jessica seemed to be taking it hard. Apparently she'd received a bigger blow than they thought. She always talks badly about her parents, but it looks like she hasn't changed at all on the inside. Even now, she's still a pure-hearted, delicate person who can't doubt others. I'm sure she respected her parents as much as anybody else does. And that her parents started raging about money, inheritance, my money, right in front of all the other parents and children. It's no surprise that she received such a shock from hearing that.
ジェシカちゃん、どうかお父さんとお母さんのことを嫌いにならないで。理解しろとまでは言わないから、せめてどうか嫌いにならないであげて。
分かってるよ。少し放っておいてくれよ。
6 years ago, I would have kept taunting Jessica even after she got all dejected, but I guess I really have grown over the last 6 years. I realised it'd be better to just leave Jessica alone right now. Jessica suddenly looked away sulkily and left the parlour. She probably wanted to be alone for a while. I could do nothing but wordlessly watch her back as she left.
そういえば、マリアちゃんはどこに行ったんだろう。
多分まだ肖像画の前でいじけてるんだろうぜ。
Maria truly looked up to witches, and she'd expected that coming in direct contact with Beatrice and receiving the letter as proof would surprise everyone and make them happy. However, the adults had doubted its authenticity, thoroughly bombarding Maria with questions and refusing to accept her story. Even for me, it was hard to imagine how much that must have hurt Maria. We couldn't speak to Maria or Jessica. In the end, George, Anarchy and I just abandoned ourselves to the sound of the falling rain and the dark night.
台風はどんな感じなんだろうね。ニュースをやってないかな。
George and Anarchy started walking over at the corner of the parlour where the television was. He hadn't called me over, and I really couldn't have cared less where the typhoon was on the sea right now, so without going over at the television, I loitered around the window.
そんなに風は出てなさそうだけど、海の上はひどいのかしらね。天気予報では暴風警報も聞いてたんだけど。
キリエさんか。大人たちの積もる話はどんな感じなんすか？
As if Kiria's not an adult herself. She seemed to catch the sarcasm. Kiria-sen shrugged.
この胃の痛くなる話は徹夜で続くのかしら。嫌になるわ。
まあ、せいぜいよろしく。じい様の財産分配について、ハゲタカごっこをお楽しみくださいってんだ。最低の気分だぜ。
それに関しては同感よ。バトラ君みたいに席が外せるなら、私もそうしたいわ。でもそうもいかない。たとえ発言権がなくてもね。パートナーも大変よ。
Kiria-san took a deep breath, smiling bitterly. That's right. They probably wouldn't let Kiria-san speak since she only married into the family. Still, as Dad's partner, she had no choice but to stay by his side and support him. She's probably had to bear the full brunt of his mental pressure much more than me. I wasn't going to apologise, but realising that I'd spoken too harshly, I cut the sarcasm for the time being.
どんな感じなんすか？相変わらず謎の魔女ベアトリーチェの話題で持ちきりですか？
まあね。あの人たちは、おじい様が亡くなった時の遺産分配について、兄弟4人で話をまとめようと、そこへ未知の5人目が現れて、話をややこしくしようっていうんだから、穏便な話のわけもないわ。互いを罵り合ったり、かと思えば共闘しようってことになったり。夏日姉さんでなくても頭痛がしてくるところよ。
On the one hand, they all want a larger portion than the other siblings, so they're all rivals. But on the other hand, they don't want one yen to be snatched up by anyone other than the siblings, so they're all allies. I hadn't been told the details, but the siblings are apparently discussing how to protect their shares under various situations. Setting up a ceasefire agreement and rules to prevent anyone from getting an unfair advantage, even preparing to resort to legal action if absolutely necessary. That they would go this far to preserve their shares was so beyond disgusting that you just had to acknowledge their resilience.
ってことは、ベアトリーチェはじい様からの資格ってとこですかね。自分抜きで遺産の分配なんて話を勝手に進めてた息子たちに一泡吹かせたかったんだろうぜ。
何者かしらね、ベアトリーチェって。自称してることが全て本当なら、今日まで誰にも知られずにいた謎の人物で、しかもおじい様の隠し黄金の存在を知っていて、その上当主の指輪まで委ねられている。相当に信頼された人物ね。
さすがにほうきにまたがった魔女だとは思わないっすけど、でも魔女と呼ぶに値する怪人物であることは間違いないっすね。
マリアちゃんがそのあたりのことを詳しく話してくれればいいのだけど、みんな小さい子にがっつきすぎだわ。すっかり怯えてしまって、聞けるものも聞けなくなってしまった。あの人たち、北風と太陽とか読んだことないのかしら。
確かなのは、マリアがベアトリーチェと名乗る人物から手紙を受け取ったこと。自分で現れて直接話せばいいものを、手紙を託して今もどこかに身を潜めているっていうシャイな怪人物ですけどね。
ねえバトラ君、ベアトリーチェなんて人物が本当にいると思う？
さあ、あくまでも偽名じゃないっすかね。じいさまの代理人としてその妄想の中の魔女の名を名乗ることを許されたとか。
そうじゃなくて、今この六軒島には全部で18人いるの。19人目が存在すると思う？
Are there really a full 18 people on the island right now? Wondering about that, I began counting on my fingers, and it really did come out to that many.
19人目が存在すると思うって。
Let's count together. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. There really is 18 people on the island right now.
どういう意味ですか？
言葉通りの意味よ。マリアちゃんに傘を貸した人物は私たち18人の中にはいないらしい。なら19人目がいて、その人物がマリアちゃんに傘を貸したと思うのが妥当じゃない？
ま、そうなりますね。
ならその人物は今どこにいるの？少なくとも雨が降り出した瞬間には島にいた。そしてその後はどんどん天気は悪化して、とても船なんか出せない状態。
What they're implying is this person has been on the island the whole time.
となれば、その人物はまだ島の中にいて、どこかで雨宿りをしていなくてはならない。私たち誰の目にも触れずね。
確かに。俺たちは屋敷やゲストハウスの中を勝手にうろつき回ってましたが、誰も19人目なんかには会ってないわけですよね。でもまあ、これだけの広さのある島ですし、屋敷やゲストハウス以外に雨宿りできるところだってあるのかも。
At about this time, I began to realize what direction curious and suspicious suspicions were taking us in. Curious-san was denying that a 19th person existed. Beatrice was one of the 18. In other words, she thought someone we knew well was tricking us.
ベアトリーチェが自称する通りなら、その人物は間違いなく最高の賓客よ。おじいさまが信頼する最高の腹心。そんな人物をおじいさまが歓待しないわけがない。お屋敷に迎え入れないわけはないのよ。でも私たちは誰も見ていない。
待ってくださいよ。それはちょいと請求な推理じゃないですか。確かに誰の目にも触れてはいないけれど、だからって19人目を否定することにはならないんじゃないですか。何かの理由があってこっそり上陸してずっと隠れているのかも。悪魔の証明ってやつっすよ。いることを証明するのはたやすい。ベアトリーチェってやつが俺たちの前に現れて挨拶すりゃ解決する。
I guess we would call this Schrodinger's cat, right?
でも19人目がいないことを証明するのは不可能っすよ。
バトラ君の推理の仕方は悪くないわ。現在の状況では19人目の存在を認めるにも否定するにも情報が足りない。でもね、 チェス盤をひっくり返して考えると、ほぼ19人目はありえないって断言できちゃうのよ。
Bend the chessboard around was one of Kirie-san's favourite phrases. I've been influenced by those words a lot, and I use them myself from time to time. When you get stuck trying to find a move in chess or shogi, then by spinning the board around and looking at everything from your opponent's standpoint, you can often see a strategy that will give you the upper hand. It means turning things around and putting yourself in your opponent's shoes.
いい？仮に19人目の人物としてベアトリーチェが実在したとして、その人物は誰にも知られることなく、こっそりとこの島に上陸し、ずっと隠れていた。
I just want to take a little quick pause here, so I don't mind if you want to pause this video in live time and start just like spitballing theories at me. In fact, it is encouraged. I will take great joy in listening to all of your theories. Of course, I will answer nothing. I am but a humble messenger. I am Beatrice's messenger, as she would say, as Maria would say. So yes, please do spitball me theories. Who do you think it is? Who do you think there's an 18th person on the island? Do you think it's one of the 18? If you think it's one of the 18, do you have any suspicions? Do you have any little inklings as a this person was suspicious? Yeah, I'd be very, very, very interested to hear this. In fact, this is where the whole joy of watching people go through Umineko comes from, is there's just so many theories and so many mysteries to solve that the big joy for me is going to come from listening to your theories, from watching you suspect everybody. Oh, it's going to be so glorious. I cannot wait. I'm like rubbing my hands together right now.
何かの理由があってね。なら、どうしてわざわざ姿を現してマリアちゃんに手紙を渡したの？
It really was a contradiction. If they had some reason for hiding themselves, then they should have stayed hidden the whole time. But even so, they had appeared openly in front of Maria.
それは、ほら、マリアも言ってた。メッセンジャーにされたって言ってたじゃないですか。マリアが一番年下で素直そうだったからじゃ。
メッセンジャーなんて必要なの？手紙を親族会議の席上に送りたかったら郵送すればいいだけの話よ。4人の兄弟全員に郵送すれば黙殺することもできない。手紙を持参してこっそり手渡す理由がないのよ。
確かに、なんだかおかしな話っすね。
そもそもベアトリーチェが存在していて、その存在をアピールしたいなら、みんなの前に堂々と姿を現せばいいだけの話。なのに現れず、マリアちゃんという小さな子を通して、おぼろげな輪郭だけでその存在を主張しようとする曖昧さ。矛盾。もっと考えて。マリアちゃんの前に姿を現し、19人目の存在を印象づけるという点と、今この瞬間も私たちの前に姿を現さず隠れ続けている点。これらの矛盾。これを念頭に置いた上でチェス盤をひっくり返すの。つまり19人目の人物としてベアトリーチェがいると印象づけたい人物の目論見は何かよ。
姿を隠したい人物ならその存在をアピールするわけがない。そして姿を現したい人物なら手紙を託すなんて遠回しをするわけがない。ってことは
簡単よ。ベアトリーチェは18人の中にいるのよ。だからこそ18人以外の人物が存在するような幻想を作り出しているのよ。これ見よがしな19人目のアピール。それで得をするのは姿を潜めた19人目じゃない。すでにいる18人の方なのよ。もちろんこの推理は穴だらけ。いくつかの前提がひっくり返るだけですぐに崩れる脆いものだけど、私はほぼ間違いないと見てるわ。
This is starting to feel pretty creepy. Someone lent Maria the umbrella and handed her the letter. Supposedly, none of the 18 did this, and yet Beatrice was hiding among those 18. What was this person planning, hiding their true form and pretending to be Beatrice?
マリアちゃんの自作自演も疑ったんだけど、文章の内容が非常に手が込んでて、マリアちゃんが自前で用意したとは考えがたい。でも、マリアちゃんが何者かと共謀している可能性も否定できないわ。
おいおい、マリアは9歳のお子様だぜ。誰と何を共謀するってんだよ。しかも愚直で真面目で素直なあの性分だぜ。
ええ、私もマリアちゃんの性分はよく理解しているわ。でもだからこそありえると思うの。魔女に憧れ、その存在を盲信している夢見がちな少女。そこにベアトリーチェと名乗る人物が現れて魔女だと名乗ったら、彼女はそれを大喜びで鵜呑みにして信じるんじゃないかしら。
つまりあの肖像画のごついドレスを着て変装すればマリアを騙すことは難しくないと。
その論法になっちゃうと、私たち女性陣はみんな疑われちゃうことになるんだけどね。とにかくマリアちゃんが何者に出会ったのか、それの詳細を聞くことがこの謎を解く一番にして最も身近な鍵なのよ。しかしその鍵は少女の心の奥に堅くなに閉ざされてしまったわ。みんなが頭ごなしに魔女の存在を否定し、一体その人物は誰なのかと問い詰めすぎた。マリアちゃんは当分大人には心を開かないでしょうね。
In the dim hall, in front of the portrait of Beatrice, Maria was sobbing.
誰もね、マリアがベアトリーチェに会ったことを信じてくれない。ベアトリーチェとくれた手紙も見せたのに、それでも信じてくれないの。
とにかく鍵はマリアちゃんが握ってるわ。ベアトリーチェが18人の中にいるのか19人目なのか、それを知る鍵をね。
マリアは頑固だぜ。あいつへそを曲げるとなかなか機嫌を直さないからな。
大人の私より子供のバトラ君の方が機嫌を直せる確率は高そうよ。彼女の機嫌が直ったら聞いてみて。遺産分配がどうのこうのって話には関心ない。こんな王道洋館ミステリーみたいなシチュエーションにはワクワクしちゃわない？マリアちゃんに手紙を渡した人物は一体誰なのか。知的好奇心がうずくわ。
うんざりするような金の話に付き合わされてもワクワクとは実にタフなことだぜ。大人はすげえや。
I shrugged exasperately. But I did notice something. Kiria noticed how dejected I was after overhearing our parents' turbulent discussion, and was probably trying to clear the air. At the very least, I'd recovered enough to voice my complaints. She wasn't my real mother, so I've never felt like calling her a mum. But it did make me think, she's a real adult.
おうガキども、ここにいたのか。キリエも長え化粧直しじゃねえか。俺も次からは化粧をしてくることにするぜ。
ごめんなさい。女の化粧は長いのよ。どう？兄弟水入らずの話し合いは。
さぞや和気あいあいとしてるだろうよ。
Kiria-san poked a weak spot under my arm with her elbow.
一度頭を冷やそうってことで小休止さ。こりゃ夜通しになりそうだぜ。泣けてくれ。
His way of talking hadn't changed, but he couldn't completely hide his fatigue. I couldn't say I was sympathetic, but he looked pitiful compared to his normal energetic self.
しかしひでえ雨だな。ゲストハウスに戻るのも嫌になるぜ。夏日姉さんが屋敷で泊まれるよう準備してくれたらしい。どうする？
3階になった時に考えてもいいんじゃない？部屋に戻る体力もなくなってたら、その時はお世話になりましょうよ。
そうだな。その時に考えりゃいいか。バトラーはどうする？
俺がいちゃお邪魔だろうからよ。気使って向こうに戻るぜ。
そうか。すぐ戻るのか？
さあな。一人で戻ったって寂しいしよ。子供全員で揃って帰ることにするぜ。
そうだな。そうするといい。それで、バトラー。お前、今夜はそうは簡単には寝ないだろう。
多分、いとこたちとおしゃべりしてるだろうからな。夜更かししそうな気配はあるぜ。それがどうかしたのかい？
そうか。もし、大人たちの会議が終わってお前がまだ起きてたら、ちょいと家族でしたい話があるんだ。
なんだよ。柄にもねえな。
Apparently, Kiryu-san was thinking the same thing. What are you talking about? She asked him in a small voice. It looked like Kiryu-san didn't have a clue what Dad meant either.
キリエにも聞いてもらいたい話だ。後で話すから、今は聞くな。頼む。
I don't know anyone who neglects the concept of family as much as this old bastard. And now he's saying we're gonna have a talk as a family? Both Kiryu-san and I couldn't help but get wide-eyed.
そうビビった顔すんなよ。ビビりてえのは俺の方なんだ。何しろ。
At that point, he swallowed his words for an instant, even though putting on airs of importance wasn't much like my dad.
気持ち悪いぜ、親父。今、家族は全員揃ってるじゃねえかよ。もったいぶらずに言えよ。
俺は多分、今夜、殺されるだろうな。
Oh no, Rudolph, whatever makes you say that? There was a huge crash of thunder. It must have been really close. Dad's expression, brightly illuminated by lightning, was burned into my eyes. Dad's face, which always looked so sure of itself, and which always wore a taunting expression, was strangely frail in a way I couldn't really explain. It was so worn out that he looked like a different person.
は何言ってんだよ、柄でもね。
同感よ。どうしたの？急に弱気ね。あなたらしくもない。
俺も化粧直しに行ってくる。
Yeah, Rudolph, go powder your nose, bro.
ついてくんなよ。
Dad turned away weakly. After that, only Kyrie and I were left, still wide-eyed.
なんだってんだ？今夜殺される？まさか、あの妙な手紙のせいで、親父ビビっちまったのか？連続殺人者の映画の見過ぎだぜ。
Kiryu-san didn't answer my light-hearted words and continued to stare at my dad's disappearing back.
バトラ君はルドルフさんに今話せと言ったら話さず立ち去った。みんなに話すことがあると言い出しながら答えなかった。どうして？チェス盤をひっくり返す。すると
話すと言っておきながら話せない矛盾。なんすかね。親父側から見ると何か見えてきますか？
ええ、見えるわよ。話したいことがある。でも自分から言い出す勇気がない。だから追ってきて俺に話しかけて聞き出してくれが正解ね。ついてくるなも逆の意味よ。ついてきて俺を問い詰めてくれが正解。まったく甘えん坊さんなんだから。
そういう推理でいいんすか？そんなんめちゃくちゃな。
名探偵や名刑事が男女の気持ちや心を推理できる？できないでしょ？異性の気持ちを探るのは何次元のトリックを暴くよりはるかに高度な技術なのよ。私に言わせれば名作推理小説より恋愛小説の方がよっぽど難解なミステリーなんだから。
そういうもんすかね。
私はあの甘えん坊さんと一緒にいるわ。普段は虚勢を張ってるけど、今夜はかなりの激論で疲れ切ってる。誰かに寄りかかりたい気持ちなんでしょうね。それに応えるのがパートナーの役目よ。
はあ、そりゃあお熱いことで。じゃあ、うちのクソ親父の世話をよろしく頼みますよ。
ええ、任せておいて。
He called out to Curious Anne's departing back.
何？
いや、ありがとよって。おかげで、陰鬱な気分がだいぶ晴れたぜ。
ならよかった。コミュニケーションは大事ね。
After answering with a wink, Curious Anne followed after Dad. Natsuhi could be found in a dimly lit hallway. Now and then the thunder would crash, but this had no effect on Natsuhi's expression. She looked completely worn out. The discussion that had just taken place between the relatives in the dining hall was repeating itself inside Natsuhi's mind. Beatrice had proclaimed that in addition to the gold, all the inheritance and property of the Ushiromiya family would be given to the person who could solve the riddle. In other words, she planned to undermine the absolute guarantee that Kraus, as the oldest brother, had to succeed the family head. Originally, the other siblings had absolutely no chance to inherit the headship. To them, this proposal by Beatrice was extremely desirable. It was obvious by that they would accept it. There was no need to play some clumsy detective game. Natsuhi knew that the so-called 90th person Beatrice could not exist. Naturally, Beatrice was nothing more than a fictional character used to pass a message that Kinzo had written himself. As proof, Kinzo had remained stubbornly neutral as to the letter's authenticity. He was completely ignoring these reckless claims that he shouldn't be able to ignore that he had given up the head's ring. In short, Kinzo had wordlessly admitted that the letter held his own message. Most likely one of the servants had given Maria that letter. Kinzo had probably worked out an elaborate plan where the dress from the portrait would be prepared, and someone, probably Shannon, would be made to wear it and deliver the letter and the umbrella. By doing that, he could make it seem like the witch from the portrait actually existed. No, if anything, that alone was proof that Kinzo was behind this. In that case, it was the same as Kinzo trying to butt in on the siblings' private discussion. Then, Kinzo, by announcing that he'd give everything to the person who solved the riddle, he could weaken Kraus's overwhelming advantage. Now it was certain. Kinzo had eavesdropped on the siblings' discussion in the parlour earlier that day, so he had known how Kraus had staved off the attack by the other three. And to make the scales of the battle go back into balance, he had sent out this strange letter which benefited Kraus's rivals. He was trying to push this crazy theory so that Rosa, who had a weak position among the siblings because of her age, would join with Eva and Rudolph. Then with a 3-to-1 advantage, they'd be able to overwhelm Kraus yet again and make their ridiculous theories get accepted by force. And by doing that, he gave them the power to resettle what had once been a nearly decided conflict. They had now started repeatedly pressing Kraus to pay them a large amount of money, using the condition that all the siblings would guarantee Kraus's position as the successor. Talk about advance payments was being brought up again despite having been rejected once. Of course, even without the story about the hidden gold, the Ushiromiya family's store of wealth was vast. That store of wealth alone was more than enough. Even if the hidden gold was buried forever along with Kinzo's death, there would be more than enough to satisfy. Therefore, even if they weren't that interested in the gold itself, Kinzo had managed to instill the lifelong fear that on the off chance that someone found the gold, that person would be granted the headship. And this kind of Achilles heel would definitely be taken advantage of by someone sooner or later. The only person with this fatal weakness was the successor Kraus. The other siblings had found, no, they had been told by Kinzo about something that only Kraus could lose, and they had thoroughly taken advantage of that. Natsuhi, as Kraus's only ally in this painful position, and as his wife, wanted to fight alongside him. She kept trying to explain to him that the existence of the gold itself was a farce, and that there was no need for him to compromise. Kraus had always told Natsuhi. He had told all the siblings He always said that the hidden gold was nothing more than an illusion created by Kinzo. Therefore, Natsuhi had believed it as his wife and had supported her husband on that foundation. Even so, Natsuhi's words didn't reach Kraus. Even though Natsuhi had fought so hard and had lent all of her strength, he continued to fight by himself and was trying to compromise with one of the other 3 siblings. Natsuhi sadly and weakly wondered why she could not be of use to him, then started to get angry. It had happened when everyone decided to take a short break to cool their heads. Natsuhi had flared up against Kraus. Enraged, she asked why she could not be useful to him. He had then told her that he wanted to talk about something and invited her to a room that she was normally not allowed to enter. That room had been sealed away with a heavy-looking padlock, and just looking at it had given her an uncomfortable feeling. Kraus removed the padlock on the door. He then motioned for Natsuhi to enter.
入りたまえ。
何ですか？
見せたいものがある。君に初めて見せるものだ。
Natsuhi timidly opened the door with a dubious expression on her face. It was pitch black. She searched for a switch to turn on the lights, but since this was her first time in the room, she didn't know where it was. Kraus entered behind her, pushing her in, and when he closed the door before turning on the lights, the 2 were swallowed up by the darkness. Only the sound of Kraus locking the door rang out through the dark.
これは何事ですか？明かりは？
今つける。待ちたまえ。
Just as he said, when Kraus pushed a switch on the wall, a flickering light turned up and lit up the room.
それは。
Natsuhi had her breath taken away. The room had no windows, and at a glance it appeared to be empty. In the middle of the room, a small round table had been set, and the lights brightened only to that table, as if that were the leading part in the play. On top of that table, a red tablecloth of elaborate design had been set out, covered with dust, and on top of that, something about the size of a grown man's arm had been set down. That something took Natsuhi's breath away.
凄まじい純度を持つ黄金のインゴッドだよ。こいつがなければ誰も黄金伝説を信じはしなかった。
It was an ingot of solid gold. Even in the faint light, it sparkled with a noble and dignified glint.
こいつはまともなインゴッドじゃない。このインゴッドを鋳造したのが国内なのか国外なのか、それすらも私にはわからないんだ。
It took a high level of skill to make the purest of solid gold ingots, and in order to verify that purity, it was standard to have the original foundry and the name of the bank that guaranteed it imprinted on the gold. However, this gold ingot did not have that kind of seal. This mysterious gold bar had come from an unknown foundry.
ここを見たまえ。怯えることはない。こいつはただの金塊だ。
Natsuhi, following Kraus's words, timidly approached the ingot.
そこだ。
Kraus pointed at the surface of the ingot. Natsuhi concentrated on that section. Right there was the thin imprint of the one-winged eagle crest. Natsuhi's breath was taken away once again.
そうだよ。これこそが親父がベアトリーチェに与えられたといい、保証人のマルソーの会長に任意で一つを抜き取らせて持ち帰らせ、財界のフィクサーたちを信用させたという。で、方々に手を尽くして私が見つけた。他の兄弟たちより早くね。
そんな。じゃあ、お父様の黄金伝説は
実在する。後ろ宮金蔵が授けられたベアトリーチェの黄金は実在するのだよ。
そんな。
にあるなんて。
Natsuhi was shocked. Kraus had always said that Kinzo's gold was just a fabrication, so she had believed it as his wife. However, the reality was different. Since he held definite proof, he had been more certain than any of the other siblings that the legend of the gold was true. Because of this, Kraus was deeply frightened at the possibility that someone other than himself would find the gold that he failed to find, costing him everything. But to her Natsuhi, this truth was more than enough to split open her heart. She had thought that, as Kraus's wife, she could be as close as confidant, which is why she had selflessly supported him. And yet, he had hid this fact from her until today. Why?
そこまでに私はあなたの信頼に足りないというのですか。
そういうつもりはない。話す必要がなかっただけだ。
あなたにとっては妻はその程度のものなのですか。
落ち着きたまえ。劇場にすぐ駆られるのは君の悪い癖だ。
あなたがそうさせてるんじゃないですか。私は後ろ宮家に嫁ぎ、今日まであなたの妻として仕えてきました。あなたのために生まれた家を捨て、身も心も捧げてお仕えしてきました。その報いがこれなんですか。そんなこと。
Kraus grimaced, looking annoyed. His expression effectively communicated how much he disliked the parts of Natsuhi, even if it didn't say it out loud.
私はもうあなたの力になれそうもありません。
うん。それでいい。兄弟のトラブルを私が自分の力で解決する。君の力は借りんよ。
違います。これは後宮家のトラブルです。確かに私にはこの身に家紋を刻むことが許されていません。でもあなたの妻です。なのに私には力添えする資格もないのですか。あなた。
君を思えばこそあえて関わらせなかったのだ。これ以上は頭痛に触るだろう。君は今夜はこれで休みたまえ。兄弟の話は兄弟でつける。君は関係ない。それだけだ。
A dull headache tormented Natsuhi. No matter what medicine she took, no matter what scent she burned, it wouldn't heal. In fact, simply wandering alone through the dark corridors and listening to the sound of the rain seemed to be a better cure. I may be Natsuhi, but I was never Ushiromiya Natsuhi. I have been despised and treated as a borrowed womb and insulted when I couldn't even fulfill that role. Even so, I've tried to properly perform my duties as a wife. But now, even my husband has rejected me. I've done my best raising my daughter, as if it were the last job I was left to do. However, I've had no release for my anger and my sadness, and they've caused me to subconsciously strain that relationship too. Because I've been excessively strict in Jessica's education, she dislikes me thoroughly. She despises me for having no interest in anything but grades. There is no longer anything I can do for the Ushiromiya family. No, that's no good. Despite it all, I must help my husband and beat back the schemes of the other greedy siblings. The family head won't be around much longer. Even Kraus will succeed the head. And then the next successor will be Jessica. Strictly speaking, the man who enters the family by marrying Jessica will become the next head, but it all comes to the same thing. I have to make Jessica an excellent successor whom everyone will accept as worthy to take over the Ushiromiya family. In the days to come, that greedy Ushiromiya Eva will probably be plotting to find some fault with the main family, and if all goes as she plans, Jessica will be dragged down from succession with George set up in her place. It is regrettable, but George is a man, and even more, has matured as a person. Compared to Jessica, who is right in the middle of a rebellious period, and whose grades are slightly below average, it can be seen at a glance who is more fit to succeed the head. So in order to secure Jessica's position, I need to turn her into an excellent person. After doing that, I want to find her an excellent husband, worthy of the excellent person she will have become. A wonderful man who will truly accept Jessica and stay with her throughout all of life's joys and sorrows. Was Natsuhi trying to entrust her daughter with fulfilling some desire of her own? Natsuhi thought back to the days when she'd had no choice but to marry into the Ushiromiya family because of that unavoidable fate. She had tried to block that from her memory. She had consciously forgotten it and had actively attended to the life she'd been given to as Ushiromiya Natsuhi. And in doing so, she'd built up a new life. But just now, it felt like all of that had been casually rejected. Natsuhi helplessly rested her head against the glass of the window. The glass, which was cool thanks to the raindrops beating against it, felt somehow refreshing. Even though it should have been emotionless right then, it seemed to be the only good thing that Natsuhi... it seemed to be the only thing that Natsuhi... It seemed to be the only thing that could understand Natsuhi. Fuck me. I can't English. At that point, even if someone had appeared, Natsuhi didn't intend to pay any attention to them. But she did pay attention, because it was her beloved daughter. Just like always, her words were rough and not at all like a girl's. Instinctively, her words of rebuke rose to Natsuhi's throat. However, their strength gave out and they didn't escape her lips. Jessica was seeing her mother in a position of feebleness for the first time, so she was considerably disconcerted. Until just now, she had been filled with contempt for all the parents, including her mother, but just now those feelings had been completely swept away. Her mother's utterly exhausted face had wiped them all out. In its place, the words George had told her floated back up to her mind. Our parents are doing their best in their own way, and because their families are counting on them, they can't afford to keep everything pleasant and have a heavy responsibility to fight. Maybe her mother had been standing around this dimly lit hallway because no one had tried to understand that in her. Jessica hated her mother, so she had no intention of speaking kindly to Natsuhi just because she was looking a little frail. So when she attempted to speak kindly to her mother anyway, she had to clench her fists and gather up the words from deep in her heart. Natsuhi wasn't being cold. She just wanted her daughter to go as far away so that she wouldn't have to bump against Natsuhi's own short temper. But there was no chance that Jessica would realize this. Jessica hung her head, looking sad. Seeing that expression, Natsuhi recognized the kindness that Jessica was trying to muster. She gave her head a small shake to drive her own unkind feelings. She called Jessica, who was trying to leave and looked lonely, to a stop. Yet with that thought in mind, Natsuhi left Jessica with words of gratitude and made to depart. This time, Jessica called out to her mother's back. Natsuki stopped and turned around, asking what business Jessica had with her. But Jessica herself didn't know why she'd stopped her mother, and for a while she just smiled wryly, muttering to herself as she hesitated over what to say. She was poking around in her pocket when her hand touched something and she took it out.
あのさ、母さん。私さ、今日お守りもらったんだよ。なんだっけな。魔除けだったっけ。確かそのドアノブにぶら下げてるといいんだっけ。忘れちまったぜ。私が持ってても仕方ないし、母さんにあげるよ。
It was the scorpion charm that Maria had given her on the beach. Although she had heard of its various effects from Maria, Jessica's mind had gone blank, and she was just barely able to say even that much. Jessica, thinking that her mother probably wouldn't accept it anyway, immediately drew back the hand she had stuck out, grasping the charm. So when Natsuki came back to take it, she was extremely shocked.
これは何かの景品？
まあその私も多分そうだろうと思ってるけどよ。こんなおもちゃみたいなお守りじゃご利益は期待できねえよな。
But her mother took the charm from where she grasped it in her hand.
ありがとう。大切にします。ジェシカには今度、私が子供の頃大切にしていたお守りを代わりにあげましょう。
別にそんなつもりで渡すんじゃないぜ。でもまあどうしてもって言うなら。
では私はもう休みます。頭痛がひどいので、ジェシカもあまり夜更かしをしすぎないように。
Natsuki put the charm in her pocket and turned away. She then disappeared into the dark hall.
やっぱり明日も丸一日こんな天気みたいだね。
やれやれ。今日の日中が嘘のようだぜ。
George, Aniki, and I were killing time in front of the parlor television. At that point, Jessica returned. Her face was still blank, but it looked like she'd calmed down a little since we'd last seen her.
マリアはまだ肖像画前？
いや、さっき戻ってきて。今はそっちのソファーで寝てるぜ。マリアにはもう遅い時間だもんな。
Looking at the clock, I saw it was a little past 10 p.m. Even if we were planning to stay up all night, it was about time to head back to our room.
一応うちのおふくろが屋敷にも部屋を用意してくれたんだけどよ。どうする？
僕はゲストハウスに戻りたいかな。親たちの様子を見る限り、僕たちはお屋敷にいない方がいいと思う。
俺も同感だぜ。子供は邪魔せず引っ込んでろって感じみてえだからな。おとなしくそうするさ。
As we were talking about this, Aunt Rosa came into the parlor. She was looking all over restlessly, probably trying to find Maria.
ローザおばさん。マリアならそこのソファーっすよ。
ありがとう。すっかり眠っちゃってるわね。ベッドに移さないと。
よかったら僕がベッドまで背負っていきましょうか。
This is going to be so much longer than I thought it was going to be. Fuck. Alright.
ありがとう。助かるわ。ジョージ君たちはゲストハウスに戻るの？
I forgot how long this section was. Fuck.
それとも夏日姉さんが用意してくれた部屋に泊まるのかしら？
今話し合ってました。ゲストハウスへ戻ろうかって話になったところです。
そう。
ならマリアも一緒にしてあげてもいいかしら。いとこのみんなと一緒の方がきっと安心できると思うしね。
Behind those words, she seemed to be concealing some regret that the adults, herself included, had deeply hurt Maria's feelings.
任してくださいよ、おばさん。何しろこっちにゃマリアをあやすことに関してはエキスパートがいるっすからね。
それは僕のことかい？僕だけじゃ無理だよ。みんなでだよ。
そうだぜ。バトラだってあんなにもマリアと意気投合してふざけ合ってたじゃねえかよ。
As we said this, Aunt Rosa smiled, looking truly happy.
みんなありがとう。私たちの話し合いはだいぶ遅くまでかかりそう。だから申し訳ないけどマリアをみんなにお願いするわ。
おーい、マリア。熟睡か？
Was?
ゲストハウスに戻るぞ。
Maria muttered something indistinct, rolled over and fell back asleep. It looked like she was sleeping deeply.
すっかり寝込んじゃったようだぜ。起こすのは悪いな。
僕が背負うよ。
Maria's body was much lighter than it looked. I lifted her up and put her on George Aniki's back. It was raining hard outside and Aniki couldn't hold an umbrella and carry Maria at the same time. It looked like Aunt Rosa would come with us as far as the guest house to help out. However, when she heard Uncle Curse's voice called out to her, he had no choice but to return.
困ったわね。もう戻らないと。
皆さん、ゲストハウスまでお戻りですか？
After we left the hall, on the way to the entrance, the door to the servant room opened and Shannon-chan stepped out.
だいぶ暗くなっておりますので、私がご案内させていただきます。
ちょうどよかったわ、シャノンちゃん。ジョージ君がマリアをおぶっていてくれるの。傘をさしてあげてくれないかしら。
はい、かしこまりました。
Shannon-chan brought umbrellas for each of us and a flashlight to guide the way. As we opened the front door, the downpour was quite terrific. It looked as though we wouldn't have any spare time to take a pleasant walk and enjoy the nighttime rose garden.
兄貴、重くねえか？俺が背負うぜ。
大丈夫だよ。マリアちゃんくらい背負えるよ。
本当にありがとうね。マリアをよろしくお願い。
わかりました。じゃあ、おやすみなさい、おばさん。それでは、お送りしてまいります。
ええ、よろしく。
I think this section's gonna have around 15-20 minutes left. Aunt Rosa watched us leave.
マリア、いつもごめんね。
Rosa's mumbling voice didn't reach the person in question nor any of the kids, but disappeared beneath the sound of the rain. After cutting through the rainy rose garden, we arrived at the guest house.
俺がマリアを背負って立候補すりゃよかったぜ。そうすりゃ傘を差してくれるシャノンちゃんのでっけえお乳を二の腕でたっぷり堪能できたってのによ。
そんなつもりじゃないよ。誤解だよ。
そうしないと、ジョージ様が濡れてしまうと思いまして。ほーら、バカなこと言ってないで入るぜ。
After being urged on by Jessica, we folded up our umbrellas and went inside the guest house.
お召し物を濡らしてしまった方はいらっしゃいませんか？タオルを用意いたしますが。
そこまで気を使わなくていいぜ。ありがとうよ、シャノンちゃん。
そうだ。僕たちはこれからトランプでもして少し遊ばないかって話なんだけど、よかったら。
あれ？今日のシフト、深夜勤は誰になってんだ？
親族会議中は特別シフトになってたと思いました。少し変更も出てるみたいなので、ちょっと確認してきます。
ああ、わざわざ屋敷に戻らないとわからないんなら無理に。
大丈夫です。ゲストハウスの使用人室でわかりますので、ちょっと失礼しますね。
Shannon-chan gave us a quick bow and went into the guest house servant room. The rest of us headed for the cousin's room and decided to put Maria onto the bed for the time being. Maria was sleeping very deeply, and there was absolutely no sign of her eyes opening. For now, we'd get some soft drinks out of the room's refrigerator and drink those while playing cards or something.
あれ、カノン君、源氏様までこちらに。今夜のシフトはどうなっているのでしょうか。
クラウス様の命令があってね、シフトの大掛かりな変更があったんだよ。
ゴーダがお屋敷の深夜勤に変更になった。シャノンとカノンはゲストハウスの深夜勤、私とクマサワはゲストハウスに泊まるようにとのご命令だ。お前も今夜はこのままこちらにとどまるよう。たった今電話があった。
ずいぶん大掛かりな変更ですね。お屋敷とゲストハウスの当番がまるっきり逆になってるじゃないですか。
Originally, Shannon and Cannon had been assigned a night shift in the mansion, while a night shift in a guest house where all the relatives were staying had been assigned to Goda, who had been an abundance of experience in entertaining. Kumasawa, who should have been sleeping at the guest house, while Genji should have been sleeping in the mansion. However, it seems that Kraus has suddenly ordered that the schedule be modified. The shifts at the guest house and mansion had all been reversed, and Genji was spending the night in the guest house.
多分ベアトリーチェ様の手紙のせいだろうね。
多分ってどうして？
あんな怪しげな手紙が現れたら、クラウス様が僕たちを疑うのは当然だからね。親方様直属の僕たちを極力親族会議の席から遠ざけたかったんだろうよ。
Genji, Shannon, and Cannon were all permitted to wear the Ushiromiya family crest, the one-winged angel, as the servants who served directly under Kinzo. Of course, since they were working for the Ushiromiya family, they had to obey anyone's orders, but their only boss was Kinzo. Since only Kinzo held the right to employ them, even Kraus could not have them dismissed of his own accord. Because of this, Kraus and the others often viewed these servants as Kinzo's underlings and often shunned them. And in fact, Kinzo seldom let anyone other than them enter his study. This sudden shift was probably a clear expression of the sense of mistrust that had caused. Considering the time that Kinzo had left to live, this would definitely be the last family conference before the problem of the inheritance came up. On top of that, the mysterious letter that claimed to be from Beatrice had dropped out in the blue. Kraus definitely wanted to keep Kinzo's loyal subjects away from the table of such delicate and important discussion.
ではすまんが、私は向こうでくつろがせてもらう。もし何かあったらすぐに呼ぶように。今夜のお客様は特別だ。
はい、かしこまりました。源氏様。
Genji nodded back, went behind the screen, took off his jacket, and slowly began to relax after a day's worth of tension.
今お戻りになられたのはお子様方。
親族の方々はお屋敷で会議を。だいぶ長引きそうな雰囲気だったかな。
なら気楽だね。これ以上の深夜になって。多分親族の皆さんはお屋敷の方のお部屋にお泊まりさ。
多分ね。源氏様がいないから言うけど、ゲストハウス行きになってちょっと嬉しかったかな。
ふん、どうしてだい？意地悪な奥様やエヴァ様から離れられたから？それとも別の理由があるのかい？
別の理由なんかありません。
そっか。なら二人で深夜勤を頑張ろう。よろしく姉さん。
私ついさっきお子様方にお部屋で遊ばないかとお呼ばれしてて。
Shannon-chan hung her head apologetically, gazing at Cannon uncertainly. Cannon didn't try to meet her eyes and spoke curtly as he sighed. It looked as though he didn't plan on indulging his sister.
ダメだよ。深夜勤を仰せつかってる。それに僕たち家具には遊びのお誘いは必要ない。わかるね。
そんなことわかってます。
Shannon's shoulders drooped slightly. She'd already expected that Cannon, a stickler for the rules, would say something like that, but she still seemed a little discouraged. As Cannon flipped through a logbook, he spoke without facing Shannon.
ならお子様方をお待たせしてしまってるね。深夜勤に当たってしまったからご一緒できないと謝ってこなきゃ。行ってきなよ。
私謝ってくるね。
Shannon hurriedly stood from her seat before her brother's mood could change and flew out the servant room, giving a quick bow. As he watched her go, Cannon took a single deep breath. Genji's voice came from beyond the screen.
カノ、私がここにいるからお前も行くといい。
源氏様、誘われたのはシャノンだけです。僕は別に誘われては。
その場にいなかったからお声をかけられなかっただけだ。言えばお前も誘われている。たまには子供らしく遊んでくるといい。
いえ、僕には必要ない行為です。人の子には遊びも必要でしょうが、僕らは家具ですから。
そうか。
姉さんだって家具です。人のふりをしたって後で苦しむだけなのに、僕はそれが分かっているから人に近づきたくないだけなんです。
Genji did not say anything after that. After a while, he stood up and used a pot of hot water to make powdered cocoa, serving some to Cannon as well.
そりゃ本当かよ。そりゃ知らなかったぜ。
バカ、声が大きいぜ。マリアが起きちゃうだろ。
Battler was so surprised that he yelled obnoxiously and scattered his cards everywhere. His voice caused Mary to turn over once more, but she soon fell back into his deep sleep. Jessica gave him a jab and he lowered his voice.
いや、しかし言われてみれば確かにそれっぽい雰囲気はあったんだよな。はあ、なるほどな。ジョージの兄貴がな。
George couldn't be seen anywhere in the room. A short while ago, when Shannon came into the room, George suddenly said that he'd forgotten something in the mansion and needed to go back and get it. Shannon said that she would guide him, just like she had on the way at the guest house, and the two of them depart together.
いや、昔からそれっぽい気配はあったんだぜ。好きなものを聞いてきたり、趣味を聞いてきたりさ。単に関心を持つだけにしてはどうもなんて思ってたらよ。
そういや、昔っからジョージの兄貴はシャノンちゃんにやたらと優しかった気がするぜ。なるほどな。
天気予報によると今夜が一番ひどいみたい。明日いっぱいも止まないらしいけど、もう少しマシになるそうだよ。
そうですか。ジョージ様の月曜日のお勤めに差し支えが出ないか心配です。
台風が来ていることは知っていたからね。万一に備えて月曜日には予定を入れなかったから大丈夫さ。 こう見えてもスケジュールは先読みできるタイプなんだ。
George puffed out his chest, acting proud. Compared to the calm appearance George always had as the oldest cousin, he now looked amusingly like a little kid. Shannon chuckled at this abrupt contrast.
さすが。やがては会社を起こされる方はしっかりしていますね。
やっぱり会社を起こすというのは大変だね。お金とかそういうのだけじゃないものがとても大事だって父さんのところで勉強していてわかるよ。会社を起こすということは城を持ち部下を率いるということ。うちの父さんは秀吉って名前だけあって戦国武将のエピソードがとても好きでね。会社経営の哲学をよくそこから語るんだ。知ってるかい？戦国最強の騎馬軍団と恐れられた武田信玄も最初は部下たちの結束がバラバラで統率力をまるで発揮できなかったんだそうだよ。
そうなんですか？なんだか意外ですね。
信玄は部下たちを結束させるため数々のリーダーシップを発揮してるんだよ。例えば戦場で武功を立てた部下に対しすぐその場で褒章を与えたり、普通こういうのは戦が終わってからまとめてやるものだからね。それを戦場の本陣の中にいながらまめにやり続け、部下の武功を素早く評価しやる気につなげたというのは非常に大きいことだよ。それから部下が病気で伏せった時には誰よりも早く駆けつけお見舞いをしたとかね。武田信玄は戦国最強の騎馬軍団を率いただけじゃない、戦国一の部下思いの人だったんだよ。
そんな方だから部下の皆さんもついてきてくれたんですね。
The truth was, Shannon had already heard this story several years ago, but whenever a discussion of his father led to this sort of topic, George would always glow and look like he was having a great time. So Shannon just smiled without interrupting, urging him to continue.
確かに資本主義の世界ではお金は力で石垣の高さでもある。でもね、戦も城も自分一人じゃ成り立たない。大勢の部下に支えられ、その力を借りて初めて成立するものなんだよ。それを理解してから父さんの背中を見ると、自分がいかに未熟で父さんがどれほどの切磋琢磨をして今日を築き上げてきたかがよくわかるんだ。
ジョージ様はお父様のことをとても尊敬されているんですね。羨ましいです。
あ、ごめん。別にそういう意味で言ったんじゃないんだよ。
すみません。私も別にそういう意味で言ったつもりは。
The two of them awkwardly looked at their feet. Shannon had no parents. She'd been brought up in an orphanage owned by Kinzo called the Fukuin House. Under the guidance of Kinzo, their honorary director, the orphanage offered members who excelled a chance for an on-the-job serving experience. If their efforts met Kinzo's approval, they'd be able to leave the orphanage and work as servants for the Ushiromiya family. This was considered to be the highest honor for those who lived in that orphanage. Servants from the Fukuin house took all names with the character on in them while they served. Oh, that picture's just fallen off the wall again. So Shannon wasn't her real name. The same went for Cannon. All of the members of the Fukuin house were orphans. At least they were all people who'd been separated from their parents under special circumstances. Because of this, the orphans had been taught to think of each other as their only family. That's why it seemed so natural to both of them when Cannon called Shannon his sister. And while both Shannon and Cannon were working in the mansion today, there were several other servants possessing the On character in their names, such as Manon and Lennon, who often worked in rotation schedule. However, there were not as many servants who stayed with the Ushiromiya family for so long. It was the standard for them to quit after 3 years, so you could probably say that Shannon, who had been working for 10 years, was a notable exception to the rule. Working as a servant for the Ushiromiya family was a heavy burden to bear, but the pay wasn't bad at all. Working for a full 3 years would earn more than what was needed to enter a mainstream society. That was why, even the orphans realised what a harsh task working for the Ushiromiya family was, they still hoped to be accepted. Maybe the fact that Shannon managed to continue working for 10 years wasn't because she had more willpower than the other servants. Maybe she'd gotten struck working for 10 years because she didn't have the courage to say she wanted to quit. Kinzo couldn't even trust his own blood relatives, and those excellent servants sent from the Fukuin house were the only ones he could rely on. Because of that, Kinzo would sometimes allow them to wear the family crest, as servants under his direct control, and have them work close to him.
もう勤めて10年近くになるんだっけ。だいぶお金も貯まったんじゃないかい。
どうでしょう。ほんの何百万かあったってそれで残りの人生を過ごせるわけもありませんし。
目標の額があってお勤めを続けてるわけじゃないのかい。
そうですね。私はこのお屋敷以外に行くあてもありませんし、お嬢様とも他の使用人の子たちとも仲良くやれてますし、奥様には時折お叱りを受けますけど、バラの世話やお屋敷のお掃除も楽しいですし。
でもそれはシャノンちゃんの。さよちゃんの人生じゃない。
Shannon cast her eyes downwards when she heard her real name. She understood what George was trying to say and fell silent.
僕は成人し、社会人になってからも勉強して分かったことがある。子供の頃、僕らが思っていたほど人生は単調で短くないんだ。
All school-age kids have certain fears they can't shake. They wonder whether they'll live the rest of their lives like sleepy classes after a monotonous and boring school day, spending their times in carefree laziness without anything interesting happening until it's all over. However, life's only like that for underage students. Compared to a human's life, the time they spend as students is nothing more than the blink of an eye, a period where they break through the shells of their immaturity. The inside of a shell might be a hot, suffocating and boring world, but the world beyond that shell is a vast and filled with limitless possibilities.
君の人生はまだシャノンという殻の中でしかないんだ。君は自分の人生がこの生活のままずっと続いていくと勘違いしてるんじゃないかな。
それは。
Shannon couldn't deny those words. She'd been unable to harbour any clear doubts about her lifestyle. Since she never had hopes or goals for changing herself, she lazily continued living the way she always had. And if asked whether this life was satisfying, she wouldn't have been able to nod. She may have been intentionally averting her eyes from the truth. Without George's admonishments, she would have continued pretending not to notice as her real life slipped away bit by bit, neglected.
ジョージ様、私はこのままでいてはいけないのでしょうか。
いけないよ。
Right, you're gonna notice a little cut here. I believe my mum is going to bed, so I'll have to cut the video here and I'll resume this recording because this part is not finished. I'll have to do the rest tomorrow.